This is not a test. Stay calm in an orderly fashion. Make your way to the lifeboats.
Mayday, the ship is sinking.
Welcome back, everybody, to our Monday podcast. As you know, on Mondays, we talk about the science of addiction. We're really fortunate, not only today, but over the course of the next few weeks, we're going to be talking about addiction on the brain. So this is going to be the first part in a multi-part series that is featuring Reverend Dr. Deborah Smith. So, ladies and gentlemen, give me a round of applause. Really excited, and it is your show. Doctor, good to see you.
Good to be seen. Thanks, Christian. So over the next couple of weeks, we're going to dive into kind of an eclectic look about substances and their use on the brain. We think about sometimes that when people are using psychoactive substances like alcohol or benzodiazepines or opiates or any of those classes, that it's sort of, there's this entertaining component, and that we know that somewhere along the line, a person goes from being entertained by one of these products that they go and they become addicted, where their body needs these products. And there's some things that are going on at the base level that maybe would be interesting for us to know. So for this first one, we're going to kind of look at generally what substances do to the body. Okay, so you have about 5 major classes of substances. There's, could be 10 that we actually look at, but the 5 major classes are going to be alcohol, sedative hypnotics. Now, sedative hypnotics, actually alcohol is considered a sedative hypnotic, but because of its process in the body, it has its own little world. Now, we think about benzos, right? So Xanax or Klonopin or Ativan, those are the big sedative hypnotics that are out there. But we also have barbiturates, which I'm not going to talk too much about. And then there's the opioid class. Many of us know very much about the opioid class, where it's highly addictive. And we know about the big pharma question that's been involved with opioids. And we know that with opiates, you can shoot them, you can snort them, and we'll go through some of how they get involved. Then there's the cannabis or cannabinoid class. I think we're going to save that one till last because it's so highly controversial, because there's this one level where people say, well, it helps me. I use it as a medicine. We use pain meds as medicines. Why are we vamping against cannabinoids? Well, because there's some other things that we need to know about cannabinoids. It's like alcohol or opiates or any of the other classes. There's some good things that can come of it. There's some okay things that can come of, use, but then there's some not so okay things that can come of use, and we'll talk about that. And you have cocaine, amphetamines, and hallucinogens. So over the next couple of weeks, we're going to kind of talk about each one of those and how they impact the body and what that looks like. We're going to set it up so that you understand that there is going to be a social component to each of these drugs. They kind of come as a social derivative. There's some things that are socially acceptable. Some of the habituation of the drugs come out of a repeated social narrative, but it actually is both external as well as internal, and it's those two things that play on each other. I don't come from the school that it says it's only physiological, that all things to do with the drug are physiological, and that if you drink enough or if you smoke enough or if you drop enough lines, that you will become addicted. That's not necessarily true. And we also know that everybody who uses a substance at one particular point in their life and has developed an addiction to that substance can go on in later life and mildly use that substance, whether you want to think about it or not. And they can use it responsibly and not have some of the addictive experiences that they had in the younger part in life. Now, this goes against the grain of A drug is a drug is a drug is a drug. It goes against the grain that all things lead to addiction eventually. And it goes against the grain of abstinence is the only way. I come from a place where abstinence is a really good goal, because why take the risk? If you've had some negative experiences because of your use of psychoactive substances, and those negative experiences have had significant consequences, you know, maybe it was a DUI and you had a lot of court costs and fines, and you maybe had to stay in jail overnight. Or maybe it was worse than that. Maybe that the court costs and fines were such that it took your livelihood. Maybe you lost a job over this. Maybe you've had to do a lot of treatment. So this notion that there were significant consequences might counterweight the experimental desire to try to reuse the substance later in their life. Because you might consider that if it had this level of impact on my life at this point, is this really something I want to go back and try again? And I put it into there's three of my favorite analogies. One is to do with tomatoes, one is to do with peanut butter, and one is to do with bees, okay? If I'm allergic to tomatoes and I wind up as a young person getting a rash every time I ate those tomatoes and having all sorts of stomach cramps and all sorts of negative physiological events because of that tomato sauce or those tomatoes, I might consider getting my pizza with what? A white sauce, an Alfredo sauce, or sauceless. Because
preferably the spicy sauce, but hey.
Thanks, Christian. The idea being that it doesn't become really exciting to me to want to relive that stomach problem. Yeah, maybe I outgrew it, but then I try the pizza again and it's just like, yeah, not a big problem. So I might go back into it, but why? Why would I want that? Same thing with peanut butter. So as a child, I'm, within 3 feet of a peanut, and I go into anaphylaxis because of the components of peanuts, and we know that that's a true problem. What makes me think that I, at age 30, want to try eating peanut butter sandwiches again? Is it just a sheer force of will to see if I've outgrown it? Am I doing some kind of experimental study under the care of my physician who says, okay, we want to try a peanut experiment. Let's go and try peanuts again. Let's see what we got here. You've gone through all of these allergy treatments. Let's see what we've got. Well, then there's a science component to that. We're doing this in a guided way. I'm not just saying at the age of 30, wow, peanut butter sandwich sounds really good to me and I'm going to give it a shot, because I've had such a horrifying exposure to that product at a younger age. Same thing with bee stings. Now, we know that some people can develop a toxicity to bee stings. We know that at a younger level that, they might have some rashing, they might have some hives, and the doctor is saying like, yeah, you've got a sensitivity to bee stings. I'd carry around an EpiPen if I were you. Well, do we then think about that in context? Like, okay, so I'm going to be a beekeeper and I'm just going to keep myself in a steady supply of epinephrine to counterweight the bee stings. I guess you could. I guess you have the freedom to do that. So that's where that comes in, is that you do have the choice to go back to that alcohol drink or go back to that smoking a joint, smoking some marijuana or eating edibles. You have those choices. That's a choice for you to want to do that now that they're pretty much legal to engage with. Yes, but if I've had significant consequences, not just the legal or the societal consequences, but I've had physiological consequences. Maybe it was a horrible hangover. Maybe it was, vomiting, nausea, diarrhea. Maybe that I, became out of it, comatose, couldn't connect with the world for a period of time. Maybe I had a period of blackout that I wasn't. what makes me think, still living in the same body, still living in the same system that I was living in earlier, makes me want to look at myself from a perspective of, well, let's try this again. That's that's where I come in when I think harm reduction, when I think about the science of things, when I think about, it's probably not your best plan to try. And I look at those analogies of peanut butter, tomatoes, and bees, where it's just, you had a pretty negative experience with those at a younger age. Why are you going to come back to that? And what's making you think that you need to do that? What's your relationship with a 12-ounce beverage or a rolled piece of weeds? What's your relationship that's saying, you know what, I have a right to do that, I'm going to do it. So what I'm talking about over the next several times when we're talking about addiction, I'm not going to come at this about like, and when we're done talking, you're all going to never want to do those drugs again because you'll be indicted. No, it's about, okay, so you think that this is okay. This is what's going on physiologically. This is what's going on socially. This is what's going on behaviorally. And these are potential consequences. Proceed at your own risk. Okay, so far, when we look at that, most of the things that we're going to talk about, except when we get into sort of like cocaine, amphetamines, the hallucinogens where they're not legal products. There is a great movement to make them legal. Again, don't have a horse in that race. I don't care. If we didn't do so good with cigarettes, alcohol, and cannabis, didn't do so good with opiates, I'm not saying that we couldn't do better with these other drugs. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me why you would want to legalize something that has caused so much damage to people's lives. And why do we want to spend time regulating access to hallucinogens? I think we have other things to do. Again, that's my opinion. That's not weighted on some position of higher learning. It's just my practical look at the world that says, really, is there something else we could be doing right now?
I think you're well educated enough to be able to have a fairly well-informed opinion about that.
Right. Okay. Yeah, but I just don't want to get into the legal part of it because that's an argument that's not winnable. There's too much strength on both sides. I'll also tell you about what I think. There's a behavioral component to all the drugs that are out there that we're going to talk about. When I talk about behavioral components, it's because a drug acts on a particular set of neurotransmitters that impact how we function. For example, let's talk about antidepressants, and let's talk about like a sedative hypnotic like Xanax. Cancer patients, and I'm going way over the edge because not every cancer patient does good with Xanax. Let's talk about Xanax for a minute. But if I have significant pain or fear of pain, and my anxiety is off the map, every time I have to think about going back to the doctors to look to see if those tumors have shrunk, or I am anticipating such pain that we who've never had cancer cannot imagine cancer pain and how painful it is. That person is going to take Xanax because it's prescribed and it's appropriately prescribed, and it's going to affect the brain. The Xanax itself is not the problem. The correct usage of that Xanax is going to tap onto some neurotransmitters, block a few things, let open a few things, do some things in the brain that are going to give a particular relief in a particular way. And in that regard, are being appropriately administered and appropriately used. The drug itself is not the evil. It's the choice of how to use it, either within an appropriate construct or an inappropriate construct. We know that Xanax in a certain portion of the population can be used at the proper levels, and the person can stop using it when it's no longer indicated for whatever condition. We do know that. There are people that have used Xanax in their lifetime that have not become addicted. There are other people who have used Xanax and have liked the feeling so much that it started this external response, the euphoria, the relaxation, the calming. They've used it and it's been like, that works. I like that. So they try it again. That works. I like that. In a particular portion of the population, they are unable to keep it at the same level because of things we're going to talk about over the next couple of weeks. There are things that happen where it no longer, that little bit, no longer has the same effect that it once did. They're building up a tolerance. So, what do you think? Well, just take a little bit more. Used to last 4 to 6 hours. Well, now it's only lasting 2 to 4. So I'm going to increase my dose. That's a logical thing. That person's not thinking like, woohoo, I'm going to, use benzos to get high all the time. Sometimes their life is in a situation where those benzos take it away. They take away the fear. They take away the anxiety. They just calm it down. But now you're looking at the behavioral side. What about that person's life is creating an environment where they can use the drug to solve something, solve fear, solve anxiety. Maybe they're in a challenging relationship. Maybe they've had a significant death that they can't seem to connect with. Maybe they've become divorced. Maybe they have this cancer diagnosis. Maybe there's been an external event so great that the only way to manage it is to be numbed through the use of a benzodiazepine. It's not the fault of the benzo. The benzo is just doing what it was supposed to do, what it was intended to do. It's the behavioral cues on the outside of the individual, whether it's a life circumstance or the situation, that increases their desire to have that response. Same thing happened with opiates. We do know that there was significant knowledge, and that's why Big Pharma has had to pay out so much. Gosh, I hope I don't get in trouble for saying that. But they have. Big Pharma has had to pay a nickel or two because they knew somewhere along the line that the concentration of the opiates that they were putting out on the market would increase the individual's desire for that drug. Now, that's a different thing. When a person is using a drug and it's used for its intended purpose, it shouldn't create within the individual a fiending, a craving for the drug. Well, they couldn't say that about opiates. Opiates, you saw a class of people, and I think we'll be studying that for years to come. And I'm going to look forward to people engaging me on the opiate piece, because those drugs created addiction in people that were not, you had a proclivity towards the addiction. There wasn't, a disrupted neurotransmitter system, or there wasn't this history. They were just men and women who got injured and needed a pain med, broke a leg, broke an arm, and needed a pain medication. And instead of looking at the lowest common denominator of, maybe taking some extra strength Tylenol or some Aleve or some other kinds of things, that they were throwing these, oxycodone and Vicodin. There was a time and day you go into the ER with a stubbed finger, and they'd be sending you home with a bottle of Vicodin, because that was the protocol. Now, we learn from mistakes. So I think that we have some things to talk about relative to the behavioral component. I will talk about the molecular and biochemical. That's not as an educated person, I can walk around those things, but those are more left to the toxicologists and to the pharmacologists who know more about that. I can talk about the behaviors. We're going to talk a lot about the development of tolerance, and the idea of tolerance not necessarily being it's external, experiential, and how that makes you feel, and so that the increased desire. But then once you use the chemicals, there is a physiological withdrawal component. And then some neurological adaptations. You know, if I keep, it's like working out, right? Right now, I couldn't run a mile to save my soul. But if I started out at 1/10 of a mile, and I did 1/10 of a mile for a couple of weeks, and then I increased it to 2/10 of a mile, I can guarantee that if my knees held out, that I could be running a mile, I would even think by the end of the summer, probably not much sooner than that. I know for a fact that I can train myself, and I started riding a bike again a couple of years ago. And by the end of it, I was doing at least 10 miles a couple times a week. Who'd have thought that I'd ever be able to ride my bike 10 miles? Not me. But I built an endurance. I built an adaptation. I strengthened components of my body to a certain extent where I was able to accomplish that. So that's what we have for the first time that we're going to be together, is this general conversation about different types of drugs. And again, we're going to focus a lot on the behavioral component. I'm not going to do too much of history or deal at all with the laws, but more deal with the behavioral piece and how we can begin to look at, if not complete abstinence, how we can begin to look at titration away from those chemicals. So, any questions?
Yeah, so a whole lot of questions. First and foremost, thank you for breaking that apart. I'm wondering if you're going to go in depth at all to what each drug specifically is, how it's interacting with the brain, what it's doing with the brain, the different chemicals. Just for our listeners, I want to know how deep you're going to go into this kind of rabbit hole as they get prepared to listen to all the awesomeness you're going to bring to us.
Well, I think that there's some benefit to knowing some of the impact on the brain, but so I'm not going to go so deep that they need a PhD to be able to understand it. I'm going to try to explain it to the best of my ability and in the simplest way possible. And I'll probably pull up a chart or two that's readily available online to show you some of the neuroimaging that has occurred when those drugs are part of you. My job here, Christian, is not to be the voice of knowing everything. My job is going to be to point you in the direction of learning more about the process of how drugs impact the body. So that if you're a professional in the field and you have never had a neurotoxicology class, or you've never studied anything with behavioral pharmacology, that you'll have some stepping off points to learn. Okay, so that's question one. Do you have another?
Yeah, so a whole list of other questions. So I'm wondering, and I don't want to give away too much because I know that you're going to be breaking it apart in the next few lectures. So I'm wondering if you could break apart maybe what the structure of each lecture is going to be like, so that an individual listening, they know that this is what they're going to get out of it. I know you did that a little bit in your kind of intro here, but I'm wondering if you could say, like, well, first we're going to talk about the chemical, then we're going to talk about how this might play out in the body and all that kind of stuff.
I think we're going to start first with the behavioral component, with sort of the social ill, and more, that's going to be just a chat of the social ill that's related to that drug. Then we're going to look at the neuroscience of the drug. What part of the brain does it impact? What is it? What can you expect if you ingest this drug? What part it's going to involve? Then we want to look at how you might adapt to that drug, the what they call neurological adaptation, or that tolerance piece. and then the withdrawal piece, what can be expected with withdrawal. And then we're going to end with some treatment concepts. So behavioral, biochemical, tolerance, and adaptation, the tolerance and withdrawal piece, and then treatment for each one.
Good stuff. Good stuff. So I'm wondering if you can speak at least a little bit about the family dynamic as it relates to kind of these different substances. I know we're going to be talking a lot about the brain chemistry, but over the last couple of podcasts, we've talked kind of somewhat extensively, just so that you're up to date. Last month, we talked about the stages of change, and then we talked about the stages of recovery. And a lot in the midst of that, we talked a decent chunk about the family dynamic, what loved ones, what significant others can do. So I'm wondering if you could talk maybe to that a little bit right now as to what a family member can do when their loved one is experiencing some of these chemical changes in their brain.
The best advice I can give anyone is to get educated, to become a student of self. Our responses to the user can often be on the full spectrum, anywhere from damaging to the process, all the way to a change agent in the process. And the important thing for a family member is to understand where on that continuum they are. Each family member has their own stage of change, that we are, when we are seeing someone who's suffering from what we believe to be some exposure, a negative exposure to a chemical. We oftentimes, well, they're an adult, they'll figure it out, the pre-contemplation, the contemplation, I'm really kind of tired of this, they're an adult, they have to figure it out, but I'm getting really tired of this. And that's kind of the pre-contemplation in the family. And then you have the, contemplation about like, something's got to change. And that's when you start seeing families applying what they believe to be good strategies. And I think that there's a lot of conversation that can be had about some of the strategies may work. We went through that whole thing about just say no. And it's just like, yeah, I'm not sure that that's the best strategy. Maybe in somebody it worked because somehow they thought that was going to be. Another was the tough love strategy, just boot them out, tell them to go, and then that was getting rid of the problem, I think people thought. And we know that in some portions of the population, the booting out changed their life. It did, but we also know that there was a lot of carnage because of that. So I think the most important thing a family member can do when they believe that someone in their family is experiencing this, or even a teacher, I'll have to tell you a story about a teacher once, a loved one of some kind, is to get educated. There is so many programs now. You have Families Against Narcotics. You have, I think it's the Alliance Against Addiction. There's all sorts of programs out there. Even what is it, Al-Anon? Mm-hmm. You have for alcohol. You have your family doctor. You have so many. Go to therapy yourself. I've seen folks that want people to fix the person who doesn't know or hasn't bought into the fact that they have a problem. And we have family members that say, here, take this person, fix them, without fixing some of the dynamics. Because remember, there's a behavioral and there's a social component. This is not the old-fashioned blame the parent piece, or blame the husband or the wife, or blame the boyfriend, the girlfriend, blame the partner. This is not about that. It's about you're the one who is experiencing this behavior of another person you care about as being negative. Go get some help.
Sure.
Okay.
Absolutely. So I'm wondering if, you mentioned a little bit there about kind of the help or the different types of help that somebody can receive. Can you go a little bit more in depth into what you perceive personally, Dr. Deb, what you perceive to be one of the best ways that an individual can seek help?
Yeah, I think that, well, it's contextual. With us, we have Families Against Narcotics. I just love that organization because they are ever evolving, ever changing, and always trying to seek some help, and to learn about what parents can do. And they've just grown massively. So I see that as a good place to begin. I would see contacting a local well-respected treatment program. In our community of Michigan, we have a system of what they call PIHPs. And no, I'm not going to unpack what that means. The issue is that those are the entities within the state that manage the substance abuse dollars. Because they manage these federal dollars, they have a really high bar that individuals that are going to get money from them to do their programs have to meet. And so I would go to the local PIHP, or go to the, in our state, it's a Department of Health and Human Services, MDHHS, to find out who is in their area that offers support. Now, in our region, and I think that it's probably all of Michigan, the MDHHS and PIHPs, in order to get funded in treatment, it's highly encouraged, and I think in some cases, if you want a certain designation, it's required that you have a family component, that you work with families, that you don't just just work with the individuals, because we know that it is a systemic issue. You have the person who's using, and then you have everybody else, so that they do have family support. You can contact your doctor. Your doctor should be kind of on board with the fact that most doctors now are very well versed in the opioid epidemic. You also have a lot of doctors who are what's called waivered, that are prescribers of inhibitory drugs to help with addiction. So you know, reach out that way. I would probably stay away from that this is strictly a mental health issue. However, your CMHs, your community mental health organizations, in my experience, have substance abuse components to them. So it's not like saying, oh, don't go to CMH, but get to the right place in CMH. Get to the people that are dealing with substance use. We also, peer coaches, there are family coaches. We have, and we're very fortunate in our region where we have family coaches. We have folks that have gone down this path with their own children that stand right next to boyfriends, girlfriends, husbands, wives, loved ones, siblings who have someone in their family that is dealing with this. So I guess get help, call for help. I know here at Wellness, we will do our level best to help get navigated wherever you are in the state, or if you're listening to this, I don't know any place too much out of the country, but within the United States, I think we could probably find just somebody to talk to that could help. But the idea is to search that out if you're a family member. Become a good student of the problem. Read things by Bill White, by Barb McCready, by John Kelly, by Lee Kaskoudas, Sarah Zemmour. I could go on for days about the people that have studied addiction and studied what they call social model recovery to help other people.
Good stuff. So with the last couple of minutes here, I think oftentimes I hear, whether it be inside of the recovery community or outside of the recovery community, there is this general conception that all addiction is the same. We hear that with like somebody who's addicted to opiates, the same types of chemical problems are happening inside of their brain as, let's say, somebody addicted to food or pornography. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to the brain chemistry and different types of addictions, whether they be substance-based or something else.
They deal with systems of neurotransmitters that are excited or create a desire for that medium. when we, let's talk about pornography. When dealing with pornography, the release that a person gets floods their body with dopamine, which should be a very intimate and emotionally rewarding release within the context of love and caring, becomes habituated because not of the intimacy or the behavioral piece of that relationship. People think like, well, don't they love me enough? Because why are they doing this pornography? Because it's not relational. The use of pornography is not a connection that is a relational connection. The connection to that is like, I've got to get that dopamine release because that's how I feel good. That's how, and we see that sometimes with people with depression, where it's that release and it just brings them back up to a level, brings her back up to a level. We also see that with food addiction. We know that they were the recovery pounds that, individuals who, I'm thinking of alcohol, that, were hard drinkers, and then they stopped the alcohol use and they did recovery and one day at a time, and they did all that work. And then within the first couple of years, they packed on 25 to 50 pounds and they've packed it on through carbohydrate use, sugar and carbs and pastas. And it's like the smoker who says things taste good. It's the feeding of that dopamine receptor system that is some of the driving force in the use of food now, instead of the use of beer, right? Instead of you have the hollow carbs of beer, you now have the fully loaded carbs of breads and cakes and sugars. And it allows that person to get a sense of relief because of their use. So it is different. You manage it differently. Food addiction is managed in a particular way. Like there's all sorts of different ways. It depends on what the food addiction is contributing to the behavioral components of the person's life. Same with sexual addiction, same with, now when you jump out into, instead of like pornography, but you're actually going and seeking, totally different. I'm not going to talk about, rape or non-consensual sex. That's a whole different piece. Pornography, folks tend to think it's a victimless crime, except there's that criminal component that I'm not going to speak to. I don't know enough about it. I don't know. I would just stumble through and become very opinionated about things. But when you're talking about an individual who's cruising adult pornography to get a release, that is much more of a behavioral piece that's giving them some dopamine flooding that helps them to be okay with their life. Is that helpful?
Okay. Yeah. So I'm wondering if you can speak at all to I guess the part that codependency can play in some of those chemical imbalances in the brain that somebody might be taking, a drug in, but then they become codependent. How can the interplay of the neurons in their brains kind of play out with an individual who's trying to get in recovery?
Codependent in what sense? With another human being?
Yeah, with another human being.
Okay, so that they want to be in recovery, but their partner is kind of liking them using?
Yeah.
Yeah. There are dynamics that develop for sure, where in systems, a person who goes from being addicted to being in recovery is going to change. And sometimes that is an unwanted experience in the life of the family. We talk about the AA piece, Bill Wilson talked about it quite a bit, where it was, in fact, they have a chapter in their big book of To the Wives, because back then that was the culture, right? Husbands and wives. We have all sorts of culture, relational situations now. And the bottom line is that you were the one that stood by that person when they were throwing up, when they were going through their detox, when you had to go pick them up from the dope house or from the police house because their behaviors got them into trouble. And you're the one who did all that work, stood by them through thick and thin, and now they're going to recover. And where are you? You know, they didn't recover any of the times that you wanted them to recover. And so they get arrested and now they're going to change. What about all the times that you asked them to change? Why not when I wanted you to? Or like, I've heard this, you know, I don't like him not using. He was kind of fun when we would go out. He just got out of control. It was kind of fun when we used to, you know, and I do a lot of work with women. So some of my patterning is going to be more for that. So I apologize ahead of time for the language piece. And I'm not negating any cultural community. It's the notion of they're fixed now. And why do they have to keep going to those classes? Why do they have to keep hanging around these people? Why did we have to get rid of all of the weed and all of the alcohol in the house? I didn't have the problem. I could enjoy a beer now and then, and I didn't have a problem. Why do we have to get rid of that? Why is my life having to change significantly because they're choosing to not use anymore? Yes, I don't want them to use anymore, but I don't want them to change. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. I think that makes perfect sense. I guess my last question here, just to because we're running a little bit low on time here, and I want to be sensitive because you're doing a huge favor that you're being willing to teach these things. But what would you have to say to people who are going through this brain chemistry, that are hearing the education, this podcast, it might be on medically assisted treatment? So what would you have to say to those individuals?
I believe strongly in medically assisted treatment. I think that we don't have enough of it. I think we have I've loved what I've seen. Since I came back to Michigan from California and I started the work that I'm doing now in 2012, all of it that was available was methadone, and methadone works in a certain portion of the population. But there are other medications that are so much better. And again, I'm not a doctor. I know we're going to try to get a couple docs to talk about medically assisted treatment, some colleagues of mine. If what we know is that some portions of the population do not come back from detox to full brain chemistry, there's a lot of depression or anxiety once they remove the drug from their system. And it really is difficult for certain portions of the population to remain abstinent while trying to change their life. What these medically assisted treatments do is allow them a level of stability so that the talk therapies and the behavioral change processes can take root, and then the person can titrate off of it. Because it is, you know, you have people out there who say, well, it's still a drug. Well, yeah, but it has this longer acting time. The half-life of a Suboxone or a methadone certainly is much more beneficial than the repetitive dosing that you need when you're using another kind of drug, where it's just constantly having to go find the drug and to use the drug and constant. Where using some of these medically assisted treatments allow the person to sort of slow that game down, relax, and all of a sudden they've got all this time that they can get a job, or they can do other things, or they can go back to school, or they can just sit and think for a while instead of getting up and having their entire day focused on copping, using, sleeping, copping, using, sleeping, copping, using, sleeping, copping, using, sleeping. And when you're in the throes of it, that's your life. Good, bad, or indifferent. It's not an indictment. It's not a bad, it's a pain. And medically assisted treatments allow for that person to go, okay, so let's think about this for a minute. And it's an amazing thing. I've seen so many miracles of people. Not everybody needs MAT. But I'm telling you what, if you want to be the person who does MAT or doesn't do MAT to start with, and then wants to see if you can do it, if you are struggling to not use, consider it.
Good stuff. Good stuff. So thank you so much, Dr. Smith. We're so excited to have you. We will have you back next Monday for part 2, where you will be talking which substance are you going to be talking specifically on?
Jump into alcohol.
We're going to jump right into alcohol. That I don't think of a better way to start this off. With that being said, as you know, everybody, we have podcasts every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Monday is about the science, Wednesday is about the meditation, and Friday we interview. Thank you.